The gun was already on the table before the man finished his sentence. No one told Park Si-jun to put it there. His hand moved before his mind agreed, the way lightning moves before thunder, and the three men sitting across the polished conference table went completely still. The kind of still you go when your body understands something your mind is still catching up to. The oldest of the three, a thick-necked man named Director Jang, who had walked in with a practiced look of confidence, looked at the gun. Then he looked at Si-jun. Then he looked at the gun again. He did not finish his sentence. Nobody in the room breathed. Seo-jun did not look at the gun at all. He was looking at Director Jang's left hand. Specifically, at the small rectangular shape pressing against the fabric of the man's inside jacket pocket. A recording device. Jang had come wired, expecting to capture something useful. He had arrived 40 minutes early to prepare. None of that mattered now. Hi viewers, have you ever walked into a room and immediately felt something was deeply wrong, before a single word was said? Drop your answer in the comments right now. I read every one. Seo-jun reached across the table. He didn't grab. He extended 2 fingers and tapped the surface in front of Jang's chest, twice, slowly. Then he pointed at the pocket. His interpreter, Mr. Cho, cleared his throat. Mr. Park says, whatever is in your jacket pocket, put it on the table. Director Jang's jaw worked silently. The younger man beside him was already reaching into his own jacket, not for a weapon, but for his phone. He wanted to call someone who could make this particular moment stop happening. There wasn't one. Park Si-jun was 29 years old. He controlled 7 districts, 4 shipping ports, and enough government officials to rewrite a zoning law over lunch. He had never raised his voice in a meeting. He had never needed to. The gun on the table was not a threat. It was punctuation. The recording device landed on the table with a small, flat click. Si-jun looked at it for 2 seconds. Then back at Director Jang. And whatever lived behind Si-jun's eyes made the older man pull his hands back and set them flat on the table like a man surrendering without being asked. Here was what people outside never understood about Park Seo-jun. He was deaf, and he had been deaf since birth, and he had built an empire on the specific edge that silence gave him. Every other man in a room like this one was fighting the noise, the words, the arguments, the emotional current running under every sentence. Seo-jun moved through all of it from a distance nobody else had access to. He watched. He read. He knew. The meeting ended 19 minutes later. The Jang faction left with terms 30% worse than what they had entered hoping for. They walked out quickly. One of them was sweating through his collar. The youngest one looked like a man quietly reconsidering his entire career path. Seo-jun sat at the empty table after they left. Mr. Cho waited by the door. The gun was still on the table. The city of Busan pressed itself against the windows below, all motion and light and noise he could only see, never hear. He had built everything on that separation. The silence was not a wound. It was a wall. Walls, properly built, kept danger on the other side. He had never questioned what might be on his side of it. He should have. Because somewhere in that building, on the 14th floor, in a room that appeared on no official floor plan, a woman named Zola had been waiting, patiently, deliberately, with something in her bag that was about to make his entire world unrecognizable. She had been waiting for 2 years. And she had not come empty-handed. She was mopping the floor when the head of security walked past her for the 3rd time that morning without making eye contact. Zola didn't look up. She kept moving the mop in long, even strokes, steady, unhurried, so practiced that her hands did it without instruction from her brain. She was 63 years old. She wore her gray-streaked hair pinned flat against the back of her head, the way her grandmother had taught her. Practical and clean. Her uniform was orange and white. Her shoes were the specific kind that only people who stand for 8 hours understand. 3 security guards changed shifts on this floor at 7:45 every morning. Zola had been here since 6. She had already cleaned the east corridor, the guest bathroom, and the service elevator landing. By the time the guards ran their handoff, she was invisible to them. Not because she was hiding. Because she had decided, over many months, that invisibility was available to anyone disciplined enough to want it. She had made it an art form. The park estate staff rotated like seasons. People came, fell short of the standard, and disappeared, let go in that quiet, final way that this organization did things, with a week's pay and a look that ended the conversation permanently. In 6 years, Zola had watched 4 head stewards, 3 personal chefs, 2 security directors, and 1 very confident housekeeper named Mehi cycle through and vanish. Zola remained. Nobody asked why. That was the gift of invisibility. When you became part of the furniture, nobody questioned why the furniture was still there. She had a system. The building's internal management logged every room and every cleaning window. Zola followed the schedule without deviation, except for 1 room on the 14th floor that didn't appear in the system at all. She had found it in her 3rd month. She had noted it and said nothing. She had cleaned it quietly, once a week, every single week since. Nobody had ever acknowledged she was doing it. The room held a filing system. Floor-to-ceiling shelves. Boxes labeled in a handwriting she had come to recognize as belonging to a man 4 years dead. Park Do-hyun. Seojun's father. She had not touched those boxes for her first 2 years. She cleaned around them. Dusted the shelves. Replaced the light bulb when it burned out. She had been a registered nurse in Atlanta for 18 years. 18 years that had taught her, above all other things, the discipline of patience. You did not rush a diagnosis. You let the full picture assemble before you named what you were looking at. In her 4th year, she found the hearing aids. 2 of them. Sitting in their case on the bathroom shelf in Seojun's private quarters. She was cleaning the bathroom. She saw them. She set them in her palm and held them under the light, 2 small, expensive, precisely fitted devices that had never been worn. The ear molds were factory clean. Not a single scratch. Not a fingerprint. She placed them back exactly where they were. She made phone calls. An audiologist she had worked with in Atlanta. A neural specialist in Houston. A classmate from nursing school who ran a hearing rehabilitation clinic. She framed everything as professional curiosity, the careful kind that doesn't announce what it's actually looking for. What she was told changed the shape of everything she thought she understood about the man on the 28th floor. She stood in the corridor outside the 14th floor room one afternoon with that knowledge sitting in her chest like something dropped into still water. The ripples kept moving. She let them. What hurt most was not the cruelty. She had seen cruelty in hospitals. She knew exactly what it looked like up close. What hurt most was the architecture of it. The precision. Someone had made deliberate choices, layered over years, to guarantee that Park Seo-jun would never understand what had been taken from him. Zola wrung out the mop. Moved to the next section of floor. She knew something that had the power to split his world in half. The question was never whether to tell him. The question was whether he would believe her when she did. She walked into his study on a Tuesday. No knock. No announcement. No pause in the doorway waiting for permission. The door opened, she was inside, and the morning light came with her, and Park Seo-jun looked up from the documents on his desk with the expression of a man who had just encountered something that had no category in his experience. He was not afraid. Seo-jun did not do afraid. But he was, and she had counted on this, completely without a ready response. Zola walked across the room without rushing. She set her bag on the chair by the wall, the one with the decorative throw pillow that suggested the room occasionally accommodated another human being. She set it down carefully, the way you set something down when you need the person watching to understand you are not in a hurry. Then she walked to his desk and placed the device on the surface between them. Small. Matte gray. Nothing alarming. It sat there like a question he hadn't been asked yet. His eyes moved to the device. Then to her. Then his hand reached toward the intercom that summoned Mr. Cho. Zola placed one hand flat on the edge of the desk. Not blocking him. Just present. A pause in the moment. He stopped. She reached into her bag. Took out a notepad and pen. She wrote in block capital letters, large and deliberate, the kind that left no room for misreading. She turned it around to face him. He stared at the notepad. She watched his face do something she recognized from 18 years of hospital work, the look of a person receiving information their body understands before their mind agrees to. A tightening around the eyes. A stillness so complete it looked like holding something in by force. He read the 4 words again. She counted to 7 in her head. 7 was usually enough. He pressed the intercom. Mr. Cho arrived in under 3 minutes. Thin man, careful posture, the alertness of someone who reads a room before entering it. He looked at Zola. He looked at the device. He looked at Seojin's face, and whatever he saw there made his own expression go smooth and still. Seojin signed to him. Mr. Park would like to know who authorized you to enter this room, Mr. Cho said. Nobody, Zola said. Level. Not defiant. Just true. That's the point. Mr. Cho translated. Precisely. She had been watching him for 6 years and she knew exactly how precise he was when Seojin's eyes were on him. Seojin signed again. He asks what you want. Zola pointed at the notepad. Then looked directly at Seojin, not at Mr. Cho, not at the space between them, but at him, and said, I want him to take this seriously. I came because someone had to. Nobody else did. Mr. Cho translated. The room went quiet. The kind of quiet that has weight. Seojin looked at the notepad for a long time. Long enough that the morning light shifted slightly on the floor between the desk and the window. Long enough that Mr. Cho didn't move and the air in the room felt like it was waiting for something. When Seojin looked back at her, something in his face had changed. Not softened. Not opened. Shifted, the way a locked door shifts when the correct key is placed against it, even before the turn. She had prepared for controlled anger. She had prepared for dismissal. She had not prepared for this specific stillness, not the stillness of a threat, but of a man holding himself together while something large moved through him. He hadn't signed anything else. He was reading the notepad a 3rd time. Zola did not bow. She had not bowed to him once in 6 years. She had been professional, she was not reckless, but she had never performed the specific posture that everyone else in this building wore permanently. She was not going to start now, because what she was communicating required that her posture communicate it clearly. She was not afraid of him. And she was not finished. You were not born deaf. He did not touch the device that day. He let her leave. Without calling security. Without summoning anyone. He watched Zola pick up her bag from the chair, cross the room without rushing, and go through the door as evenly as she had come through it. He watched the door close. He sat at the desk with the notepad, the device, and the 5 pages of documentation she had left beneath the notepad without drawing attention to them, and he did not move for a very long time. That was Tuesday. By Thursday he had read the documentation so many times the edges of the pages were soft. At 2:19 in the morning on Friday, with the house completely still, with Mr. Cho asleep in his quarters and Busan pressing itself against the windows below, Seojin picked up the device. The 5 pages had explained what it was. Bone conduction technology, sound transmitted directly through the skull, bypassing the outer ear entirely, reaching the cochlea through vibration. The kind that worked on partial hearing loss. The kind that had not existed in accessible form when the doctors of his childhood had told his father the situation was permanent and the silence was final. She had written at the bottom of the last page, in the same block letters, "Do not take it off when it gets loud. What comes next is worth it." He put the device on. 4 seconds of nothing. Then sound arrived, and it arrived the way a freight train arrives at a station where you were expecting a bicycle. The refrigerator in the kitchen 2 rooms away was breathing. The window to his left had a seal gap and outside air was coming through in a continuous thin hiss. His own heartbeat was suddenly inside his ears. He had not expected that, had not expected to hear his own body from the inside, to understand for the first time that he had been vibrating with sound his entire life and had only ever felt the edges of it. He pulled the device off. Sat with both hands flat on the desk. Breathe through his nose, out through his mouth. Put it back on. The second time was different because expectation changes everything. He sorted through the layers: refrigerator, window, heartbeat, building, and beneath all of it, the city. Busan at 2 in the morning was still alive and insisting on itself, continuous and layered, millions of people existing simultaneously in sound. Then his throat made a sound. Not on purpose. The air moved through him in a way it apparently always had, producing vibration he had never been able to access. He heard himself make a sound and his hands came up from the desk without instruction, as if he needed to catch something. He heard his own voice for the first time. A rough, low note. Involuntary. Just breath meeting shape. He stayed with that without moving. Then he pressed play on the recording already loaded on the device. She had loaded it there, and he had known from the documentation this was coming, and none of the preparation was enough. A child's voice. Young. Unguarded. Talking to himself in Korean the way children talk when they believe no one is listening, running commentary on something outside a window, describing a bird on a ledge, its color, the way its head moved. Free. Natural. A child in full possession of his voice, using it without thinking the way you breathe without thinking. The child was talking. The child was not deaf. Seojun's hands pressed flat on the desk. He pushed down against the wood because he needed something solid under his palms right then, something that wasn't moving. He knew the voice. He knew it in the bones, before the brain, the way you know a place you grew up in even after years away. He knew it was his own, and even though he had never heard it before, he knew it, and the knowing hit him in a place that no meeting, no negotiation, no threat had ever reached. He pressed stop. Refrigerator. Window. His heartbeat. He pressed play again. A different voice. Older. Male. Deliberate, the voice of a man who knew the recording was running and had chosen every word before speaking. A voice Seojun recognized from memory and vibration, and the specific way every person in his life changed expression when they mentioned who it belonged to. He had not heard his father's voice since Park Do-hyun died 4 years ago. He heard it now. And the first thing his father said, in a tone that was calm, careful, almost gentle, was not directed at Seojun at all. It was instructions. For someone else. And they explained everything. The recording was 31 minutes long. Seojun listened to all of it without moving, without pausing, without removing the device. When it ended, he pressed play and listened again. The second time he kept his eyes on the window, on the city lights below, on something real and external that could not be rewritten by what he was hearing in his ears. His father's voice was organized. Methodical. Directed at a man named Director Shin, a name Seojun recognized from the outer edges of the estate's legal structure, a consultant who had served the Park family since before Seojun could walk. Park Do-hyun explained things with the calm of a man who had made peace with his decisions long ago. No hesitation in the voice. No wait. The tone of a man describing a business plan to someone who needed to understand it completely. Park Seojun, his father explained, had been born with partial hearing loss. Not total. Partial. The kind that, in 1994, with wealth and connections to every medical specialist in South Korea, could have been treated. Early hearing aids. Auditory therapy. Intervention during the developmental window when the brain was still learning to process sound. His father had known this. He had chosen differently. Seojun sat in his chair and heard his father explain, in an almost gentle voice, that a deaf air was an air no one could manipulate through words. No whispered flattery reached a man who couldn't hear flattery. No emotional play worked on a man who processed everything through observation and silence. The silence, his father said, and Seojun listened to this part 4 times, was not a limitation. It was an installation. A wall built deliberately around his son, designed to protect him from the specific kind of destruction that had broken every other powerful man his father had ever watched rise and fall. He was not taking something from his son. He believed completely that he was building something for him. Seojun set the device on the desk. The sound of the room dropped away. refrigerator, window gap, heartbeat. All of it gone. Back to the silence he had lived inside his entire life, the silence that, he now understood, had never actually belonged to him. He sat with that. 29 years. Every negotiation, every room, every moment of reading a man's face faster than the man could build a lie. He had been proud of that, worn it the way other men wore strength, as something earned, something forged, something entirely his own. He looked at his hands on the desk. It had been installed. The confidence. The edge. The way he moved through the world. All of it built on a foundation someone else had poured while he was too young to know the ground was being shaped underneath him. He thought about his father watching him operate. Watching the empire grow. Watching the room go quiet whenever his son walked in. Had Do-hyun felt pride? Or had he felt the satisfaction of a man watching a machine he built perform exactly as designed? He reached for the documentation Zola had left. The final 2 pages, the ones he had skipped in his rush toward the recording. He read them now. They contained names, dates, a precise, source timeline, not the work of a woman who had stumbled into something accidentally. This was research built over years. The kind that required access to places a maid had no official reason to enter, and knowledge she had no official reason to have. She had come here with a purpose. She had been executing it for 6 years. He turned to the last page. Below the final date, in the same block letters that had been steady throughout, she had written one more line. He read it. Then read it again. He set the pages down with careful hands. Outside, Busan moved through the night without any awareness of what had just shifted in this room. The city did not know. The guards downstairs did not know. Mr. Cho, asleep in his quarters, almost certainly did know some version of it, enough of it, and had chosen, for 11 years, to say nothing. All of them had known. The people inside his walls. The people he had trusted without examining because the silence had never given him reason to question. And somewhere in this city, no records, no traceable history, carrying 6 years of evidence she had built one careful day at a time, was a woman whose last line on that final page had told him something that changed the shape of every question he thought he'd already answered. He did not know who Zola really was. And he understood now, with cold clarity, that finding out was going to take everything he had. Mr. Cho was on the phone, and he did not know Si-jun could hear every word. That was the part that changed everything. Not what Mr. Cho said, though what he said was damaging enough. It was the ease of it. The tone of a man speaking when he is completely certain that the person he answers to is not listening. Seo-jun sat in the dark of his study, the device against his skull, Busan quiet below, and he listened to his interpreter of 11 years stand in the corridor one room away and speak like a man on a lunch break. He doesn't suspect a thing, Mr. Cho said. A little quieter this week, maybe. But that's just him. A pause. Director Shin's voice, too far away for full clarity. No, Mr. Cho said. He's fine. Everything is fine. Fine. Seo-jun set both hands flat on the desk and looked at the city below. For 14 nights he had worn the device in private, listening the way he had always read rooms, carefully, without reacting, building the full picture before deciding what the picture was. He had listened to the kitchen staff talk about their weekends. He had listened to the security rotation at the gate discuss a television show. He had listened to the house breathe and exist in sound in ways he was only beginning to learn. Most of what he heard was just people. Ordinary people doing what people do in spaces where they believe themselves unobserved, dropping the careful version of themselves and becoming whoever they actually were. This was not betrayal. People needed space to be ordinary. He understood that. Mr. Cho was different. Mr. Cho's calls to Director Shin had a structure. 4 calls in 14 days. Logistical on the surface. But every call contained the same core exchange, what Seo-jun had done, what Seo-jun had asked about, whether Seo-jun seemed to notice anything. And at the end of each one, the same conclusion. He doesn't know. For 11 years, Seo-jun had believed his power came from what he could see. from the edge of reading a room through silence while everyone else fought the noise. He had built his identity on that, on being the one man in any room who could not be deceived. He had been the most deceived person in every room he had ever entered. Not by enemies. By the men beside him. Sometimes betrayal isn't a decision. It grows in the space between what someone knows and what they choose to say, until the distance between those two things stops feeling like distance at all. It just becomes how things are. It becomes routine. And routine, left alone long enough, becomes invisible, not because anyone forgot it was wrong, but because no one wanted to be the person who said so. Mr. Cho was not a villain. Si-jun understood that. He was a man who had inherited a system and had continued it because continuation was easier than examination. He had arranged his entire professional identity around a structure he had not designed and had never questioned. None of that made it acceptable. He removed the device. Sat in the original silence. The silence of a man who had been managed since birth and was only now, at 29, learning the full size of what that meant. He had expected rage. What came instead was colder than rage and more useful. He had known what his next move was since the night Zola turned that notepad around. He had simply needed to confirm the shape of what he was moving against. The shape was clear now. He picked up his phone. And then he stopped. Because there was one question the recordings hadn't answered, one thing Shin's voice hadn't answered, one thing that sat at the center of everything like a lock with no visible key. Who had sent Zola? And why did they know enough to send her, 6 years ago, before any of this had surfaced, before anyone in his circle had given them any reason to think it would? Someone had been watching him for a very long time. And they had not been afraid of what they saw. She was gone. Not reassigned. Not transferred. Gone, the way a person disappears when disappearing is something they planned for from the start. No forwarding information. No exit record with the domestic coordinator. No final paycheck routing number on file. She had worked the morning shift on a Wednesday, completed 2 corridors and the service elevator landing, returned her uniform to the staff locker room, and walked out of the building at 11:47. The security log showed her badge tap at the exit. After that, nothing. Seo-jun stood in her old room on the staff residential floor, small, clean, entirely cleared out, and looked at the bare shelf above the bed. He had expected a thread. A deliberate trace left for him to follow, the way everything else she had done had been deliberate. The room gave him nothing. It was finished empty. The empty of someone who had completed a task and had no further use for the space. He gave the order to Kwon, his most reliable investigator, 2 years with the estate, no prior connection to his father's network. Find her. Real name. Real history. Kwon came back in 72 hours with a file that was thin in the wrong places. The name Zola Beaumont appeared once in a Georgia nursing registry, associated with an Atlanta hospital, for a period ending in 2009. After that, nothing. No tax records. No residential history. No passport renewals. The nursing license had lapsed and had never been reinstated. Her reference letter traced to a healthcare consulting firm in Atlanta that had dissolved in 2015. The firm had been real, Kwon confirmed it. 23 employees at its peak. It had closed following the retirement of its founder, Dr. Celestine Okafor. Savannah, Georgia. 78 years old. Had not responded to 3 attempts at contact. Si-jun looked at the file and then set it down and thought about what a person had to do to be this unfindable. Not the technical part, the expired documents, the lapsed license, the dissolved firm. Those were tools, and tools were available to anyone who knew where to look and had sufficient time. Tools required something else behind them. They required a purpose deliberate enough to be worth all of that construction. She had not stumbled into this building. She had not spent 2 years building a medical file on a man she had no connection to out of simple curiosity. Someone had sent her. Someone had known what was in those boxes on the 14th floor. Had known the information was buried. And had understood that the only person with the ability to surface it was the man living 28 floors above it, A man who did not know it was there. Someone had decided it was time for him to know. And they had placed a 63-year-old nurse inside his building and waited 6 years for her to finish the work. 6 years? Whoever did this knew him. Not from intelligence reports. Not from the distance most people observed him from. This was inside knowledge, the knowledge of someone who understood what he needed, and how he needed to receive it, and how long the receiving would take. Si-jun looked at the file. Then he wrote 2 words on the notepad. Find Shin. Because Director Shin had been his father's man since the beginning. And his father had documented everything. And somewhere in what Shin knew was the name of the person who had decided, years ago, that Park Seo-jun had the right to know the truth about his own life. Kwon left. Seo-jun put the device in and sat in the quiet, not listening for information this time, not tracking anyone mid-conversation. Just sitting with the difference between the silence he had been born into and the one he was choosing now. They felt nothing alike. That difference was the most unsettling thing that had happened to him yet. Director Shin arrived expecting a routine quarterly review. He walked into the 4th floor meeting room at 9 in the morning, adjusted his jacket, and found Si-jun already seated at the head of the table. No Mr. Cho. No interpreter of any kind. Just Park Seo-jun, alone, with a single folder and his hands resting on the surface the way they rested when a decision had already been made. Shin sat down. Seo-jun opened the folder and slid 1 page across the table without a word. Shin picked it up. He read it the way a careful man reads something he already knew was coming, starting at the top, moving slowly, giving nothing away in his expression until he had reached the bottom and calculated exactly what he was dealing with. His face did the thing that trained men's faces do. It went still. Controlled. Buying time. He looked up. Seo-jun pointed at the page. Read it again. All of it. On the page were 3 things: a transaction record showing recurring payments from an estate sub-account to a shell company Shin controlled. A phone log, 47 calls between Shin's personal number and Mr. Cho's personal number over 18 months, none of them routed through any Park Group's system. And at the bottom, in block letters, 1 question. Who sent the woman? Shin set the page down. He looked at Si-jun for a long moment. Si-jun looked back. Neither moved. Then something shifted in Shin's face. Not surrender, something older. The expression of a man who had been carrying a weight for a very long time and had just understood that the carrying was done. He reached for his pen. He pulled the page back. He wrote on the bottom, slowly, in handwriting that was deliberate and final. He slid it back across the table. Seo-jun read the name. He read it twice. It was not an enemy. Not a rival. Not anyone connected to his father's inner circle or his own operations. It was a doctor. The attending specialist at Busan General Hospital in 1994. The physician who had been present at the original diagnosis. Who had filed the original report. Who had spent 30 years knowing exactly what she had been asked to do, knowing exactly what the cost of it was, and having no way to undo it until bone conduction technology appeared in a medical journal on an ordinary afternoon, and she understood, with sudden clarity, that the window was not as closed as she had believed. She was 81 years old. She lived in Jeju. She had sent Zola. She had found Zola through Dr. Okafor's network, had funded 6 years of Zola's placement in the building from her personal savings, small, regular amounts, structured so carefully they were invisible in any audit. 30 years of sitting with the weight of what she had done. 30 years of waiting for the right moment, and the right person and the right technology to exist simultaneously. And when they finally did, she had moved, not with speed, but with the patience of someone who understood that a thing done wrong the first time required extra care the second. Seo-jun sat alone in the room after Shin left. He thought about 30 years. About what it cost a person to carry knowledge that heavy, not the guilt, but the specific weight of watching a life proceed from a wrong foundation and being unable to correct it. And then deciding that the question of whether you had the right to correct it was less important than the fact that it needed correcting. He thought about Zola in her orange uniform. 6 years? Moving through his building like furniture, doing what she came to do, humming songs from somewhere else. He thought about what a person had to believe, genuinely, without doubt, in order to spend 6 years on something with no guaranteed outcome, and no recognition waiting at the end. She had believed he deserved to know the truth. That was all. It was enough. He stood. 3 calls to make. The first to Kwan, to begin the financial restructuring, every thread of Shin's involvement in the estate accounts, addressed completely and quietly. The second to a new legal team. The third call was the one he had no script for. He was going to call the doctor in Jeju. He walked to the window. Busan spread below in full morning light. The city he controlled. The city he had built a version of himself to run, starting from a lie that someone else had told before he was old enough to understand what a lie was. Everything was about to change. For the first time, the change was entirely his. He called her on a Tuesday. 4 rings. Then a voice, small, deliberate, the voice of a person who had been waiting for this call and had not been sure it was coming. He said her name. Dr. Han. 2 syllables. His Korean was rough in the places where 30 years of distance from his own voice had left marks. But the name came through clearly. A long pause on the line. Then, very quietly, she said his name back. He had prepared nothing. He had spent 2 days trying to organize what he wanted to say into something sequential, and it had refused to organize. There was no clean order for this conversation. So he stopped trying to prepare it, and he called. He told her he knew. He told her about the recording, about Zola, about Shin. He told it in short, plain sentences, the kind he had always used, and she listened without interrupting, and when he stopped she was quiet long enough that he checked the call was still connected. Then she spoke. She told him about 1994. About the hospital room and his father. About the conversation that had happened while a 3-month-old Park Seo-joon lay in a crib in the next room, not yet old enough to know that the most consequential conversation about his life was happening without him in it. She told him what Park Do-hyun had asked her to do and what she had done, and what she had told herself for years about why. She told it without drama and without self-defense, the way you tell something you have rehearsed in your own head for 30 years and are finally ready to let exist outside you. I told myself you would be fine, she said. A man like your father had resources that would compensate for anything. I told myself you would never know the difference. She stopped. I knew all of that was wrong by the time you were 5 years old, she said. I had no idea what to do with that knowledge. Seo-joon sat with this. He had expected something large. Rage, or the specific grief that comes when you finally name something you have been carrying without a name. What came was different, less dramatic and more permanent. The feeling of a thing settling into its correct place after years of sitting wrong. The woman you sent, he said. Yes. Why her? Because she was trustworthy. Because she had the training to know what she was looking at. And because she had one quality your situation required above everything else. A pause. She was not afraid of you. I needed someone whose hands would not shake when she delivered the truth. Seo-joon looked at the window. Busan in the afternoon, fully alive, all sound and motion. He had been hearing it for weeks, and it still arrived with a density that caught him. Millions of people existing simultaneously in full volume, none of them adjusting for him. I want to meet you, he said. A long pause. I wasn't sure you would, she said. There are things that don't work over a phone. Yes, she said. I understand that. 2 weeks. He would come to Jeju. She would not come to Busan. He did not ask and she did not offer, and neither of them needed to explain why. Some conversations needed ground that belonged to either person. Ground that had no history attached to it, no weight of what had already happened in it, no walls that had heard too much already. After the call, he sat in the quiet. He heard himself breathe. He was still finding that remarkable, the simple, available sound of his own body in the world. 29 years without access to it. He did not think he would ever fully take it for granted. He opened the desk drawer. The notepad. Her 4 words still clear on the top page. Below them, in the space she had left, were the 4 words he had written weeks ago and had not looked at since. He did not need to look. He knew what they said. He knew, now, what it cost to mean them. The empire did not collapse. People had waited for it. Watched the restructuring move through the Park Group like a slow current, the departures, the new appointments, the quiet dismantling of structures that had been in place for decades, and they waited for the moment when the whole thing came apart without the scaffolding that had held it together. The moment did not come. What came was something quieter. The organization became more accurate. Decisions that had moved through 4 layers of managed interpretation now arrived at Seojin's desk in their original form. He made them himself. In full possession of the actual information. And the decisions were good, not because he had become someone new, but because he had finally become fully what he already was. He went to Jeju on a Thursday in early spring. Dr. Han was smaller than he had imagined. White-haired and careful, moving with the deliberateness of someone who was 81 and had decided to treat that as information rather than inconvenience. She made tea. They sat at a table that looked out at a garden that looked out at a stone wall. They talked about Jeju first, the weather, the coast. Small things. The kind that let 2 people be present in the same room before the room became what it needed to become. Then she told him the rest. Things the recording hadn't reached. What the years after 1994 had looked like from her side, watching from a distance, understanding with increasing clarity the full size of what she had participated in. She told him about the afternoon she had read about bone conduction technology in a medical journal and had understood, with sudden completeness, that the window she had believed closed had simply been waiting. She told him about finding Dr. Okafor. About 2 years of planning before Zola ever set foot in his building. About the nights she had spent uncertain, not about whether to proceed, but about whether she had earned the standing to. She had decided the question of her standing mattered less than the question of his life. Seojun listened to all of it. When she finished, the garden was in afternoon light and the tea was cold. He looked at the table for a long time. Then he looked at her. He did not forgive her that afternoon. He was honest about that, with himself, and without saying it, with her. Forgiveness was not something you arrived at across a table. It was something you moved toward over time, and whether you reached it depended on work that was slow and entirely your own. But he had come. He had driven to Jeju, and sat at this table and listened to the full story. That was something. He drove back toward Busan in the early evening, the island giving way to the bridge and then the mainland and then the city rising in the windshield, all lit and layered and loud. He had the device on. He could hear the road, the car, the radio he had turned on somewhere on the bridge. Not for anything specific. Just to have sound in the car with him. He had gotten used to that. He thought about Zola on the drive. About her the way you think about someone who redirected the course of your life without asking permission and without waiting to see where the new direction went. He was no longer trying to find her. He had understood, slowly and without resentment, that her absence was the final part of the job, that leaving cleanly was as deliberate as everything else she had done, and that what she had left behind was already everything she had come to leave. The notepad was in his desk. Her 4 words. His 4 words beneath them. Some debts were paid in private, not because they weren't real, but because the person you owed was too careful and too complete to need a ceremony. Busan closed around him as he came off the highway. 4 million people. Full volume. Continuous and real. He had spent 29 years on the outside of that sound. He was still finding his way inside it. There were worse things than a lifetime of learning. The most dangerous thing was never being lied to. The most dangerous thing was accepting the life the lie created and calling that life your own. He had done that for 29 years. He had stopped. The door was behind him. The city, real, loud, entirely his, was in front. Hello, besties. Sometimes the loudest truths are the ones nobody meant for you to hear. And sometimes the most important person in your life is the one the world decided was not worth noticing, the one in the uniform, the one doing the quiet work, the one who could have walked past and did not. Zola did not come into that building with power. She came with patience, and knowledge, and a refusal to walk past something wrong just because walking past it was easier. She was invisible for 6 years because she chose to be. And when the work was done, she left without waiting for credit, because people like Zola already know the value of what they did. They do not need you to confirm it. This story asks you one question: is there someone in your life right now that you have been walking past? Someone whose value you have been missing because they are not loud about it, because they are not asking you to see them? See them. It might be the most important thing you do this week. Drop a comment below and tell us, has someone ever delivered a truth to you that changed the direction of your life? We want to hear your story, and so does everyone else watching. If you are not yet subscribed, please subscribe right now and turn on your notifications, so you do not miss the next story on this channel. Every story we bring you is built around the people the world overlooks and the things they carry. We are not done telling those stories. Share this one with someone who needs to hear it today. Thank you for watching.